So before we start, let me give you an overview of level 3 ke, how would the exam be structured and what will be the course be about. So there will be two sessions, AM and PM, as you would already know. So AM will be theory and PM will be MCQs. And these MCQs will be similar to your level 2 MCQs, that is case studies. And AM will all be theory. There will be 12, 14 or 13, 10 to 14 questions in AM, and then there will be 60 MCQs in PM. Now, course is not divided between AM and PM, so whole of the course can be tested in AM session and whole of the course can be tested in PM session. But how AM session is structured is, in AM session, they are more focused on portfolio management and behavioral finance. So they will be asking you questions on assessing an investor's capacity to invest in an investor's ability to invest. And in PM session, it will be mostly focused on small concepts. So they will be only testing you on small and little concepts. So as long as you know the concept, you will be able to do it. But in AM, you will have to be very careful because you will be given long cases, and you will have there is a possibility that you run short of time. So most of the people in AM run short of time. So key thing to do in AM is that you might know the answers, but you may not be able to do the whole exam. So key thing is that you should focus or practice more and more so that you are able to complete the exam in AM. Now, most of the content of level 3 is focused on behavioral finance and is focused on portfolio management. Unlike level 2 and level 1, where FRA used to be an important portion. So now you wouldn't have FRA, you wouldn't have detailed other topics, but 50% of the course is portfolio management, and that would also include behavioral finance. So behavioral finance and portfolio management is very important. And when you take level 3 exam or prepare for level 3 exam, assume yourself to be a portfolio manager. So examiners assume that you are portfolio manager or you are ready to become a portfolio manager. So they will be testing you on your ability to analyze investments or to make investments or to look at the investor from portfolio manager's point of view or from portfolio manager's eyes. So you should be, if you are given an investor, if you are given a case of an investor, you should be able to find out what is the most suitable investment for that investor is, and you should be able to make an IPS or investment policy statement for that investor. If you are not able to do so, then you are in problem. So starting with behavioral finance, first reading in behavioral finance is the behavioral finance perspective. So how we will go about all the readings is that I will first cover all the important concepts during the class, and then you will be supposed to read out through these notes. So all of these are notes, so you will be required to read out all of read through all of these notes, and then you will be required to do questions. There are questions from Schweitzer and curriculum both, and if there is a problem in any question, then you can ask me, or if there is a problem in any concept, then you can ask me. But practice is the most important thing, because without practice you will not be able to pass the exam. If you know everything and you haven't practiced enough questions, there are chances that you won't pass. But if you do not know all the concepts, you know major concepts, and you have practiced a lot, then there are chances that you can pass the exam. So make sure that you focus on practice. So starting with first topic, that is the behavioral finance. So behavioral finance basically gives you an introduction to two types of finance that prevail in the world, or two types of broad categories that prevail in the world of finance. One is behavioral finance and the other is traditional finance. So far what you have studied in level 1 and level 2 is mostly traditional finance. They gave you some introduction to behavioral finance by telling you about some biases, but they didn't go into detail. So most of it is focused on traditional finance. So key difference, you should be able to identify key differences between behavioral and traditional finance. So if you are asked that what is the difference between behavioral and traditional finance, you should be able to identify it, or you should be able to list down all the key aspects. So when we start distinguishing between behavioral and traditional finance, key words to know or key difference to know between behavioral and traditional finance is will and should. So traditional finance focuses itself on this word should, and behavioral finance focuses on this word will. So traditional finance explains what should happen or what should an investor do, and it assumes that investor will do whatever is best for him. So they first find out what should the investor do, what is the best for him, and then they assume that investor will do what is best for him. So investor will do what he should do. So traditional finance believes that investor will do what he should do, while behavioral finance says that investor might not do what is best for him. So behavioral finance focuses on the fact that what will the investor do, what will happen in the market. What should happen is out of the question. What will happen is important. So behavioral finance says that investors do not usually do, or markets do not perform in a way what is best for them. So they do not usually maximize returns, or they do not usually optimize returns. They have certain biases, they have certain psychological factors, certain different personality traits that affect their decision. So for example, if there is a stock A and stock B, if stock A is giving 10% return on risk adjusted basis, and stock B is giving 11% return on stock B on risk adjusted basis, then traditional finance would say that investors should choose B. But behavioral finance says that it will depend on the investor's personality traits, it will depend on the investor's psychological factors, investor's wealth, and many other factors to decide which stocks to be chosen. So although B is best for him, but investor might end up choosing A. Moving on, other key differences to note is that traditional finance focuses on the theory of utility. So traditional finance says that every investor would want to maximize his or her utility, and that utility will be derived from indifference curve. So every investor will have an indifference curve, and it will want to maximize its utility. So utility theory falls in the domain of traditional finance. On the other hand, behavioral finance has other theories that are bounded rationality and prospect theory. So if you are asked which if you are asked which of the following theories pertain to behavioral finance, then you are given three options, you should be able to choose one of these, bounded or prospect. And if you are asked which of the following theories pertain to traditional finance, you should be able to select utility theory. So remember these differences. So moving on, this is a comparison, some summarized comparison between behavioral finance and traditional finance. So traditional perspective says that investors will be rational. By rational, they mean that investors will optimize their returns and will do what is best for them. So investors will invest into securities that is best for them, or invest into portfolios that is best for them. And they say that individuals are risk averse, self-interested, and utility maximizers. They would want to avoid risk, and they would want to maximize the utility. And this concept is based on the theories of neoclassical economics. Secondly, another important concept in traditional finance apart from utility is Bayes formula. So traditional finance says that investors will calculate probabilities of future events using Bayes formula. So recall from your level 1 quantitative methods, you would have studied a formula that is known as Bayes formula. Bayes formula is used to calculate probability of an event given a new information has come in. So traditional finance says that based on the new information, investors will calculate new probabilities for events, and based on those probabilities, they will revise their beliefs. So for example, if an investor has invested into A, now if any new information comes in, let's say new information is bad earnings, or new information is revised down growth targets. So if any new information comes in, traditional finance says that investor will use Bayes formula to calculate the probability of future event based on this new information, and based on that probability, investor will revise its belief. While behavioral finance says that if new information comes in, investor may or may not be revising the beliefs. Investor may be preserving the belief. So investor may continue to believe what he believed earlier and may not change his belief. So that is the key difference. Remember these keywords: utility, Bayes formula, revising beliefs, neoclassical economics, and traditional perspective. And in behavioral perspective, decisions will be based on psychology. Decisions will be based on how people will behave, not how people should behave. So traditional finance focuses on how people should behave, and behavioral finance focuses on how people will behave. And the theories driven from behavioral perspective are known as descriptive theories. By descriptive theories, it means that these theories will describe how people will behave. And the theories that are driven from traditional perspective, or theories on which traditional perspective bases itself, are normative theories. And normative theories means that it will define what investor should do, and not what investor will do. So remember these keywords: descriptive theories, normative theories, psychology, neoclassical economics, utility and Bayes formula, and bounded rationality and prospect theory. Now moving on into discussing these, Now again, this is being repeated from level 1. That is, utility theory is based on 4 axioms. Axioms are those assumptions that are assumed to be true. So there are 4 axioms of utility theory: completeness, transitivity, independence, and continuity. Completeness says that if there are two options, A and B, and if an investor prefers A over B, so if there are two options A and B, then investor will either prefer A over B, or will prefer B over A, or will be indifferent between A and B. So there can't be any fourth option. Either investor will prefer A or prefer B, or will be indifferent. There can't be any fourth option. Transitivity says that if an individual prefers A to B, and if he prefers B to C, then he should also prefer A to C. Independence says that if A is preferred to B, if A is preferred to B and an amount X, and there is also C, and an amount X is added to C, then A plus XC should be preferred over A plus XB. So for example, if there is a stock A, there is a stock B, and there is third stock C. If investor prefers A over B and B over C, now if I talk about quantity, if I add a quantity, let's say 10 or 20, whatever. So if if investor prefers A over B, then he should also prefer A plus 10 units of C to A plus B plus 10 units of C. So if investor is preferring A over B and B over C, then he should also prefer A plus C over B plus C. This is independence. Continuity says that if individual prefers A to B and B to C, then some combination of A plus C should make him indifferent between A plus C and B. So some combination of combining A plus C should make him indifferent between B and A plus C. So from these 4 axioms, you should be, if you are given a question, you should be able to identify which axiom is in place, which axiom is being followed, or which axiom is being violated. As long as you know these definitions, you should be able to do it. So that is about axioms of utility. Moving on to Bayes formula. Bayes formula is based on conditional probability that you would have studied in level 1. It says that probability of A given that B has happened is equals to probability of B given that A has happened divided by probability of B multiplied by probability of A. So this sign, just to help you recall, this sign means given that. So probability of A given that B has happened equals probability of B given that A has happened divided by probability of B multiplied by probability of A. And here is a small question to practice this. So is it visible? So can you just do it? This question. You have to find out probability of U1 given that R has happened. Any problem? So as we discussed, traditional theory is based on assuming that investors are rational, and it bases it's the concept is based on this theory, that is of rational economic man, that a man, an investor, will be rational and he will react or respond with rationality. So he will make rational investments, he will make investments into the sectors or into the assets that maximize the returns, and he will be risk averse, and he will maximize utility and use based formula. Risk aversion is simple concept. It means that a rational economic man will want to avoid the risk, or he will want to maximize the return compared to risk. So he would want to maximize return on risk adjusted basis. So in traditional finance, investor is neither risk neutral nor risk lover. He is risk averse. So he wouldn't be indifferent about risk. He wouldn't be loving the risk. He would be risk averse. He would want to avoid risk. And if he is taking in additional risk, he would require additional premium or additional return. So in traditional finance, the investor's utility function or indifference curve will be this one, that is panel B, that is a concave curve. Why? Because his utility will increase by taking with increase in wealth. So this on x-axis it is wealth, and on y-axis it is utility. So his utility will increase with increase in wealth, but there will be a diminishing factor in utility. So for example, if wealth initially utility will increase at a high rate, but later the increase in utility or increase in satisfaction will diminish after reaching a certain wealth. So this will be the indifference curve. This will be the utility to wealth curve for rational economic man. Other than that, there can be an investor who is not a rational economic man, and he may have risk neutral characteristics. That is, he may not worry about risk. So his utility to wealth curve would be a linear line or a straight line. There can be an investor who is risk lover or who want to take more risk, or who is more satisfied taking more risk. So his value to wealth curve will be a convex curve. This is convex, this is concave, and this is linear. So if you are asked which kind of utility to wealth curve would an investor has, and you are what a rational economic man has, and you are given three options, linear, concave, and convex, you should be able to select concave. And if you are asked if that an investor has a convex indifference curve or a linear indifference curve or a linear utility to wealth curve, and you are asked what kind of risk characteristics would investor have, then you should be able to select risk neutral. So you should be able to identify differences between these three. That is about utility and base formula, that is related to traditional finance. Moving on, next is behavioral finance perspectives on individual behavior. So behavioral finance challenges the rational economic man assumption. Behavioral finance says that investor will not do what is best for him, or may not do what he should do. So more important question is, what will investor do? So let's say if there is a stock A, it is trading for $50 in the market, and you think its price should be $30, then it matters more, the price on which it is being sold in the market matters more than the price what it should have. So if it should have a price of $30, but it is trading consistently in the market for $50, then this price doesn't matter for your return or for your investment. So if you end up buying the stock, or if you end up selling the stock assuming that it should sell for $30 or that its price would fall, you may end up making losses. Why? Because market or generally the investors may not realize this, that may not realize the true worth of this stock, or may not realize that the stock should have a lower price than currently what it should have. Right. So behavioral finance challenges the rational economic man theory, and it challenges the rational economic man theory with two new theories, that is bounded rationality and prospect theory, that we will be discussing shortly. But just to give you an introduction, bounded rationality relaxes the assumptions of expected utility theory and perfect information. So it says perfect information is not always available, and even if available, then investor might not react or might not act on that perfect information. Individual choices are rational but subject to limitations of knowledge and cognitive capacity. They may not be able to process information correctly, and they may end up taking decisions which are not best for them. And rational economic man theory disregards inner conflicts, for example, short term versus long term. So behavioral finance says that investors' reaction to short term investments and long term investments may be different. So in short term, maybe he is not willing to take more risk. In long term, maybe he is willing to take more risk. So his reaction to short term and long term investment may be different due to his psychological differences. So these are some challenges that behavioral finance poses to rational economic man. Moving on to utility maximization and counterpoint, utility theory should also consider risk aversion, probability, size of payout, and different utility yielded based on individual circumstances. So it says that you cannot generalize utility theory. Utility theory can be dependent on individual circumstances. So for example, maybe the level of wealth that individual has, maybe the taste that individual have, maybe the risk characteristics or personality characteristics that individual has. So it can change based on individuals' circumstances. So again, behavioral finance will be opposing the theory of opposes the theory of rational economic man and utility maximization, and it all boils down to the same thing, that investor may not do what he should do. So behavioral finance says that investors' decisions or investors' response may be different from what he should do. Attitudes towards risk, observed risk behaviors are not always consistent. So it says that even risk behaviors can change. An individual might be risk averse today and might not be risk averse after 5 years, or may not be risk averse today and may be risk averse after 5 years. Risk evaluation depends in part on the wealth level and circumstances of decision maker. So maybe due to changes in circumstances, his risk profile changes. Utility function may have multiple inflections based on wealth level and circumstances. Double inflection utility function. So another important or key point is that behavioral finance talks about double inflection utility function. It says that investors' utility function can change over time. So for example, maybe initially he is risk averse, but maybe later he becomes risk lover, and then maybe again he becomes risk averse. So his utility function can have inflection points, or can have multiple inflection points through which his risk profile will be changing. While traditional finance assumes that his risk profile will remain be the same, behavioral finance says that there can be inflection points and his risk aversion can change. He can be risk averse today, can be risk seeking tomorrow, and can then again be risk averse next day. And this theory of changes in risk profile is Friedman-Savage double inflection utility function. So Friedman and Savage gave this theory that investor's profile will change over time. This profile, initially he will be risk averse. After some time, after consolidating wealth, he will become risk lover, and then as he reaches the end of his life, he will again become risk averse. So this is how utility to wealth curve will change. So moving on, prospect theory. This again will be discussed later in detail. This is again proposed as alternative to expected utility theory. What it does is, so utility theory was focused on final wealth. That is utility as a function of final wealth. Prospect theory relates utility to gains and losses. That is changes in wealth rather than final wealth. That is investors' behavior will be affected more with changes in wealth, will be more dependent on changes in wealth than a consistent final wealth. Probabilities are replaced by decision weights. Value of function is concave for gains and convex for losses. So prospect theory says that for gains, investor will be risk averse, but for losses, investor will not be risk averse. So if he is making losses, he will hold down to his investment, he will not sell it. So if he is making losses, he wouldn't avoid risk by selling off losses. Why? Because he would be expecting that stock may rebound or asset may rebound. But if he makes gains, he will immediately sell the asset to book the gains. So his attitude or response towards gains would be of risk aversion, but his response towards losses would not be of risk aversion. he will be taking excessive risk. If a stock is falling or if an asset is falling, it might be rational to sell off the asset to save yourself from further losses. But an investor might still hold up to that asset expecting that asset will rebound. It's cheaper for losses than for gains. So it will be this kind of curve. So this is prospect theory. Remember this shape of curve again. It will again come in later, but remember it. Moving on, another concept discussed in this reading is neuroeconomics. So they give you just an introduction to neuroeconomics. Neuroeconomics is about the studies of brain. So it combines neuroscience, that is the study of brain, psychology, and economics. And it by combining all these three factors, it finds out or it interprets that how will a human respond or how will an investor respond to an investment, or how would he form his decision. So neuroeconomics says that decision making will be affected by neuroscience, that is study of brain, or that is how brain is functioning. So if any chemicals in brain are changing like dopamine or serotonin, then it will affect his decision making. And two most important chemicals are discussed here are dopamine and serotonin. These chemicals basically react when investor is deriving pleasure from something or investor is having pain from something. So dopamine is a pleasure system. It is released in response to reward and expectation of reward. And dopamine may explain behavioral biases such as overconfidence and may also cause market overreaction to short-term results. So if an investor is given immediate reward, then that may lead to release of dopamine in his mind, and release of dopamine in brain can cause him to turn overconfident, and due to turning overconfident, he may overreact to the market. So that is how neuroscience is also related to decision making. So we started with economics, then we mixed up psychology with it, and now we are also mixing up neuroscience with the same thing. So as per neuroeconomics, decision making will be based on psychology, economics, and neuroscience all. But you have just been given an introduction to this. Maybe in coming years it will become a big topic to discuss on. Moving on to decision making. So when we talk about decision making, the theories with respect to decision making can be divided into two categories: descriptive theories and normative theories. Descriptive theories include prospect theory and bounded rationality theory, and normative theories include expected utility and decision theories. So we have discussed utility theory, and we will shortly discuss decision theories as well. Decision theory is also similar to utility theory. We have discussed an introduction to prospect and bounded rationality theory, and we will go into discussing it in detail now. So descriptive theories are focused on answering the question how people behave and make decisions. Normative theories are focused on answering the question that how people should behave and make decision. Again, the same concept that we discussed earlier, that traditional finance will be describing how people should behave, and behavioral finance will be describing how people will behave. So starting with decision theories identify values, probabilities, and other uncertainties relevant to given decision, and then using this information, investor makes a decision. So he will identify a value, then let's say that stock can make 10% return, and then he will calculate the probability for that 10% return. Let's say probability is 50%, and then he will account for uncertainties and calculate probabilities for uncertainties. Then he combine all these probabilities and return and do the complex calculation to arrive at the decision that what will exactly be the return or expected value, and whether the investment should be made or not. This is what decision theory says. And when he uses all this information and makes the calculation, he will obviously arrive at optimal decision if the calculations are correct. Optimal decision means that he will be maximizing his wealth, or he will be maximizing return on risk adjusted basis. Some theories with respect to decision theory are listed here: Pascal, Bernoulli, Frank Knight, von Neumann, Savage. They gave these explanations to decision theories. Pascal said that an investor will identify all possible outcomes, calculate possibilities, positive and negative, multiply these two, to get the expected value. Bernoulli said that expected value is same for everyone, but expected utility is different. Frank Knight said that risk is randomness with knowable probabilities and uncertainty is randomness with unknowable probabilities. So he differentiates between risk and uncertainty. So he says risk is randomness with knowable probabilities and uncertainty is what you do not know, or those factors for which probabilities cannot be calculated or cannot be estimated. Then when Newman says rational decision is made with axioms of utility theory, Savage says that Savage introduced subjective expected utility SEU, that probability distributions of all relevant variables can be provided by decision maker. He says that if there is any variable, its probability distribution can be provided by decision maker. So the crux is that all of these theories or all of these decision theories are based on describing that investor will do what he should do. He will use probabilities, he will use values, and he will have some estimate for uncertainties, and based on all of these he will make a calculation and decide what decision to take, and he will be taking an optimal decision. So these are normative theories. Why normative? Because these describe how people should behave and make decisions to take optimal decision. Moving on, next are descriptive theories, that is prospect and bounded rationality. Bounded rationality was proposed by Simon. It says that people do not necessarily optimize but satisfies when arriving at decisions. This word is very, very important, so remember it. You will see it in questions as well. What does satisfies means? Satisfies means satisfaction plus sufficiency. It says that investor will not be taking optimal decisions. So let's say if investor has 100 variables, let's just say 100 numbers or 100 anything, and it has dozens of, let's say 10 probabilities or different thing. If he multiply all of these and do all of his calculations, that will be a complex calculation, and based on that complex calculation he can arrive at an optimal decision as explained by traditional traditional finance. But bounded rationality says that investor will not get into all these complex situations. He will simplify it for himself. He will do something that can satisfy him and that can be sufficient. So he will go for sufficiency and not for complication. So if let's say this is giving him a utility of 100 units, if doing all these complex calculations is giving him 100 units of utility, and if instead of doing all these complex situations simply arriving at a decision or arriving at an investment decision gives him 80 units of utility, then he will select these 80 units over 80 units. So he will do cost benefit analysis of his satisfaction and the complications that he are getting into. So he would want to do only he will only do that much of work which is sufficient for him to achieve a sufficient level of satisfaction, not necessarily maximizing the satisfaction. So he will not maximize satisfaction, he will just achieve sufficient level of satisfaction. This is bounded rationality, and this concept is known as to satisfies, that is satisfaction plus sufficiency, not maximizing the satisfaction. While traditional economic finance says that investor will maximize the satisfaction, bounded rationality eases out some assumption. It says that investor will go for satisfaction and utility, but he will not maximize satisfaction, he will instead satisfy himself, that is achieving a certain level of satisfaction which is sufficient for him. So this is bounded rationality. Make sure that you know the important concept, because if you are asked which one of these is bounded rationality, you should be able to answer it. And also if you are given a theoretical question in which you are asked explain the economic finance theory applicable on the investor, you should be able to answer, select the theory and answer the question. So these definitions to these theories are very important, and these keywords are very, very important in behavioral finance: bounded rationality, prospect theory, decision theory, traditional finance, and all that. Moving on to prospect theory. We discussed it earlier as well that it is introduced as an alternative to utility theory. It divides the investor's decision into two phases, early phase and subsequent phase. So prospect theory says that there are two phases in which an investor would take decision. There will be an early phase and there will be an subsequent phase. In early phase, investor will frame prospects into his mind. So investor will make a perception about the prospects into his mind. So, and this perception or framing will be based on how he has been projected the outcome. So for example, if I say to investor that this glass is half full, investor will form a perception in his mind that this glass is somewhat full, half full or whatever, but there is something positive about this glass that it is filled. Then based on that perception or that framing, this is known as framing. Then based on this framing, he will be evaluating the options in subsequent phase and then will be taking a decision. So if this framing is problematic or is incorrect, then his decision will also be suffering from it. So for example, if I say this glass is half full, then it will get framed into his mind that up to some extent glass is full. That is that there is something positive about this glass. If on the other hand, I tell him that this glass is half empty, then he will frame it in his mind that there is something negative about this glass, and then his evaluation will also be based on those negative factors. So there will be certain framing into the mind in early phase, and then based on that he will be evaluating gains and losses. In this case he will be giving more weightage to gain, in this case he will be giving more weightage to losses, while if I look at it rationally, then both of these mean the same thing. So if we look at it from traditional finance perspective, half full or half empty means same thing. But if we look at it from prospect theory's point of view or from behavioral finance point of view, then it can affect investors' decision based on the framing or based on what we tell him or what market tells him. So there are 6 operations in editing process, in whole of this process, and you should remember these 6 operations, and you should also remember the one-line definitions of these 6 options, these 6 operations. So it starts with codification. Codification is codifying the outcome. That is, outcomes are perceived as gains and losses. As I told you, half full is positive, half empty is negative. So similarly, investor will perceive an outcome as either gain or loss. Then combination. Prospects are simplified by combining probabilities associated with identical gains or losses. So if there are 5 gains, 5 losses, then assigning probabilities to those. Then segregation. That is, riskless component of prospect is separated from risky component. So for example, if I had 3 outcomes, A, B and C, 3 opportunities or prospect, 3 let's say stocks or any assets, then investor will first codify that this relates to gain, this relates to loss, this relates to gain. Then he will assign some probabilities that there is a probability, 70% probability of gain, there is a 30% probability of loss. Like if it is half full, then he will take it as gain and assign a probability. If it is half empty, he will take it as a loss and assign it probability. 30% or let's say 50% probability. Then he does segregation. That is, riskless component of prospect is separated from riskiness. That what is the riskless component, how much is the return that I will make anyway, and how much is dependent on this probability or how much is risky or uncertain. Then he will do cancellation. That is, discarding common outcome probability pairs between choices. So between these, he will disregard those options that cannot all happen at the same time. So for example, he decides that A given 5% return and B giving 10% return and C giving 12% return. These all cannot happen together. So he will disregard this option because he thinks that all of these three things cannot happen together. So cancellation. Then simplification, that prospects are likely to be rounded off. So instead of getting into complex calculations or decimal places, he will round it off or have a holistic view on prospects. Then detection of dominance, that is, strictly dominated outcomes are scanned, rejected without further evaluation. that whichever outcome is dominating over the others, he will select it. So if he thinks that A is making most sense after all of this, he will just select A without evaluating others in detail. So this, while traditional finance would say that he should evaluate everything in detail, do all the complex calculations, and then he will arrive at optimal decision, prospect theory says that all that wouldn't happen. Investor will simplify the process and arrive on a decision without evaluating all the outcomes in detail. And remember these and their definitions. These are important. Moving on, another important concept with respect to prospect theory and with respect to behavioral finance is reference anomalies. So it says that anomalies may arise from the act of editing. What is anomaly? Anomaly is anything that is against the usual behavior or that is against the optimal decision. So for example, if I tell you that in January, stock market returns are generally higher. So there is no reason for it. Why? Because stock market returns shouldn't depend on a month. But this happens. So this is an anomaly. So anomaly is anything that cannot be rationally or by calculation justified or is against the optimal decision. Here is an example of framing. So following is an example of the isolation effect. Experimental subjects were given the choice of gambles A and B. So there is a gamble A, a 25% chance of receiving 3000 and 75% chance of receiving nothing. And gamble B, 20% chance of receiving 4000 and 80% chance of receiving nothing. So both will give you equal. Sorry, this will give you a $750 of return and this will give you an expected value of $800. Now investor will always choose B. Why? Because this is very simple calculation and there is no differences in framing of these two. Both are framed in same way. 25% 3000, 75% nothing, 20% 4000, 80% nothing. So there is no problem of framing here. So both are being evaluated in this, will be evaluated in the same way and investor will choose B. But there can be another example in which investor is given two situations. That is, first situation is given a 50% probability of winning 150 and a 50% probability of losing 100. Will an individual take this gamble? So he has 50% probability of 150 gain and he has 50% probability of loss. So his net outcome is $25. So what would investor do? The decision is easy. So investor will may take the gamble, or if investor is loss averse, he may not take the gamble. Why? Because if he takes the gamble, he is getting a return, but at the same time he also has chances of loss. So he will weigh loss against gain, and if he is loss averse, he will not get into the gamble. If he is not loss averse and he is basing decision on the primarily on the outcome or expected value, then he will take the gamble. But there is another situation, situation 2, in which so in situation 1, what will happen is that few gamblers who are not loss averse will take the gamble, but there will be many investors or many individuals who are loss averse and they will not take the gamble. So if an individual is loss averse, he will not take the gamble. Why? Because he knows that there is also a chance of loss. So why should he get into something that can give him loss? Maybe he does not get gain and end up taking loss. So in situation 1, there will be few takers of gamble. Why? Because many individuals might be loss averse or may not want to get into a situation where they may have to incur loss from nothing. Then there is another situation, situation 2, given the choice of losing 100 with certainty. So there is a choice that you will lose 100 with certainty, and a gamble with a 50% probability of winning $50 and 50% probability of losing $200. So there is a 50% probability of winning $50 So 50% probability of $50 would mean 25 dollars. There is a probability of winning $25 and 50% probability of losing $200. So let's say that is minus 100. So there is a net loss of $75 in this gamble. But investor is also passing through a situation in which he is given another option and he is told that if he doesn't take this gamble, then he will incur $100 of loss with certainty. So he is told that if he does not take the gamble, he will do $100 of loss. But if he takes the gamble, he may have he might incur $200 of loss. But still there is also a chance that he might not incur a loss. So in this case, investors would want to take the gamble. So most of the investors will want to take this gamble. Why? Because they would want to avoid the certain loss. At least they would want to move from certainty to uncertainty. Rationality would say that rationality may say that you should not move from certain to uncertain position. But investor would want to move from certain to uncertain position. Why? Because although there is a risk of 200 loss, but still there is a chance that he might not be incurring the certain loss. So framing can cause differences in investors response or investors situation. There might be another investor who want to go with this and would go with $100 loss. So how situation is framed or how options are given to you, your response or individuals or investors response can change to an investment. So if you are given any situation, you should be able to find out what a specific investor will do. If you are given a profile of an investor, a case study on an investor, and then you are given a situation, you should be able to find out what that particular investor will do in that situation. So remember, you are not required to find out what investor should do or what is the best to do in that case. You are required to find out what that particular investor will do. So when doing your questions, be very careful about the question what you are being asked. If you are whether you are being asked to tell what is the best thing to do, or you are being asked to tell what that investor will do, particular investor will do. So same, the prospect theory being continued, then comes the evaluation phase. In evaluation phase, we discussed that certain probabilities will be assigned to outcomes, weighted probabilities. So certain weights will be assigned to different outcomes, and based on that, utility will be estimated or calculated. Again, same thing that we have discussed earlier as well. That is, investors will show loss aversion. What is loss aversion? That they will be risk averse towards gains, but they will be kind of risk seeking towards losses. So when they are making losses, they wouldn't want to sell their investment. They would hold on to investments thinking that in future they may rebound. They wouldn't want to realize the losses, and due to that they may take excessive risk. So it is kind of risk loving or risk seeking. And when they make gains, they would want to immediately sell off the assets. Why? Because they would fear a fall again. So investors may be risk averse towards gains and risk seeking towards losses, and this behavior is known as loss aversion. That is, remember, this is different from risk aversion. This is not avoiding risk. This is avoiding losses. And in order to avoid loss, you may end up taking more and more risk. Moving on, perspectives on market behavior and portfolio construction. So again, something from your level 1. So traditional perspective on market behavior says that in markets, efficient market hypothesis will hold. What is efficient market hypothesis? Efficient market hypothesis says that if any new information comes in, that will be incorporated into asset prices. So if a new information comes in, investors will incorporate it into their valuations and will react to it, and prices will get adjusted into market immediately. And with respect to efficient market hypothesis, there can be 3 types of efficiencies: weak form, semi-strong form, and semi-strong form and strong form, which is not mentioned here. So weak form efficiency is states that all the past information or stock price movements will be reflected in the stock prices. So you cannot make any abnormal returns or supernormal returns based on technical analysis. So your technical analysis will fail. If a market is weak form efficient, you cannot use technical analysis to make supernormal returns. Why? Because everyone will know it and everyone would have already reacted to it. So market prices would have already adjusted themselves. Then comes the semi-strong form. Semi-strong form says, so weak form says technical analysis cannot make abnormal returns, but still fundamental analysis can make abnormal return. Why? Because it says that past information will be incorporated into prices, but present public information will not be completely incorporated into prices. Then comes semi-strong form. Semi-strong form says that you cannot even make abnormal returns based on fundamental analysis. Why? Because all the past and all the present public information, all of those will be incorporated into the stock prices. So there is no way that you can make abnormal return. Only if you have a private information, then you can make abnormal return that others do not know. And then comes a strong form. That is not very practical, but still a concept to study. So strong form says that even private information cannot make big returns. Why? Because even private information will be known by everyone and market would have already reacted. So in essence, efficient market hypothesis says that if there is any information available, investors would have reacted to it, and as investors have reacted to it, you cannot make abnormal returns. Why? Because everyone knows it and everyone has taken it into account. But then come anomalies, and anomalies change efficient market hypothesis. That is, this will not or may not always happen. And investors may not react the way they are expected to. Although information is available, and one of the investors would think it as important and would react onto it. Another investor may not find it important and may not react to it. So overall, market will not react to or may not react to the information that is coming in or that is present in the market. This is what anomalies are about, and this is how anomalies challenge EMH. There are other also points that will be challenging the EMH that we will discuss. Starting with anomalies. Anomalies can be of three types: fundamental, technical, and calendar. Fundamental anomalies are based on fundamental factors. So for example, if I say that value companies usually have lower PEs compared to growth companies, this is fundamental anomaly. So in essence, all the companies should be evaluated based on their prospects and based on the valuation. But if generally this happens that value companies have lower PEs compared to growth companies, this is an anomaly. Then comes technical anomalies. So if a company has lower PE, I will have it in mind that company may not be a growth stock. If a company has high PE, I will have it in mind that company might be a growth stock. Maybe it is not. Maybe it has high PE because investors are perceiving it to be a growth stock, but maybe in reality it is not. Then technical anomalies that are based on technical factors. What are technical factors? Technical factors are price movement, that how price has moved over past. So it emerges when one considers past prices and volume levels. So if a stock is moving like this, you may expect that the stock will continue to move on this track. So while this might not be the rational case. Why? Because maybe company is not having similar future outlook as it had in past. But assuming that price trends will follow, that is a technical anomaly. And within technical anomalies, there is a moving average anomaly that says that buy when short moving average line moves above the long moving average line. So for example, it says that, for example, if you have plotted a 30-day moving average and you have also plotted a 60-day moving average. So this point at which 30-day moving average has passed over the 60-day moving average by the stock. Why? Because the assumption is that maybe something good has happened to the stock and it has broken out from the old averages and it will now be making new averages. Calendar anomalies that are based on calendar factor, that is January effect, for example. That is maybe that if we say that returns in January are higher or will be higher, that is a calendar anomaly. or if we say that return on a particular day of the week is higher, if return on a particular closing time or month time is higher, that is calendar anomaly, and there are some anomalies listed. So just go through it once, just read out through it once, and that should be enough. Moving on, limits to arbitrage. So this is one thing. First challenge discussed to EMH, and next challenge to EMH is limits to arbitrage. So EMH believes, or traditional finance believes, that the arbitrage will cause correction in asset prices. So if an asset is selling at a higher price in one market, and if a similar asset with same characteristics is selling at a lower price, then investors will sell this asset and buy this asset. Or let's say if there is an asset A, X, that is selling at $10 in market A and it is selling at $9 in market B, then investors will sell it here and buy it here. As they buy it here, price will increase there. As they sell it here, price will decrease there, and it will converge at the same price. So it says that arbitrage will cause correction in the market prices automatically. But then again, there are limits to arbitrage, and arbitrage may not hold. Arbitrage is the assumption of EMH and traditional finance, and the challenge is that there can be limits to arbitrage, and arbitrage might not hold. So for buying asset here or selling asset here, it will require certain changes in your current portfolio, and changes in current portfolio are not easy. There can be transaction costs, there can be brand image costs. So if a fund is doing excessive trading, investors might start perceiving it as a risky fund, and also if the fund itself will require investment, or the fund itself may want to remain consistent on the strategy. Why? Because any significant changes in strategy can lead to withdrawals from the fund. Withdrawal means that investors may start pulling out money from the fund if fund is doing making excessive trades or is deviating from the strategy. So while arbitrage is possible, funds may not be engaging into arbitrage due to their limitations, and due to that, arbitrage will not lead to price conversion. That is the challenge here or limit here. Moving on to traditional perspectives on portfolio construction that we have already discussed. We discussed rational portfolio, we discussed rational economic man, we discussed that rational portfolio is formed by optimizing the return or maximizing the return on risk adjusted basis. And how is that done? Recall from level 1 in portfolio management, you studied a concept of mean variance efficient, that we will have a portfolio in which we will select the portfolios that are mean variance efficient, or that give you highest mean return with lowest possible variance, that is highest return with lowest possible risk. So traditional finance says that rational portfolio will be formed, and rational portfolio should be formed, and rational portfolio will be based on mean variance efficiency. But then again, there are some alternative models to portfolio construction, and these alternative models say that mean variance efficiency might not hold, or the portfolios may not be formed on mean variance efficient basis, and there might be other models that are used for it. So first is a behavioral approach to consumption and savings. So Shafrin and Taylor said that people spend and save rationally to achieve short-term and long-term consumption plan. Traditional finance says that whole of your wealth should be put in one bucket, and it all should be seen as holistic. So you cannot say that this 20% I will use in a different way, this 80% will be used in a different way. So when you are investing your wealth, or when you are maximizing your wealth, your decision should be optimal. That is, you should invest into something that will increase the overall long-term return. While this behavioral theory says that investor might not see whole wealth as consolidated. They may have some short-term plan. So in short term, they may want to consume, and in long term, they may want to save. So they will divide their wealth into two buckets. One is for short term and other is long term. So for short term, they will keep short term for consumption and long term for saving. What is rational? Rational is that if future returns are good, then rational is that you should invest all of your money. You shouldn't consume more today. But behavioral theory says that irrespective of the future returns, investor will have certain portion of his wealth allocated to consumption. So he will not invest all of it. He will not take a decision rationally. He will just remove the consumption portion and invest the remaining wealth. This is what behavioral theory is about. Moving on, another key concept in behavioral finance is that investor can have certain biases that will again be discussed later in later readings in detail. They can have self-control bias, they can have mental accounting, and they can have framing bias. That is, self-control bias is that people may focus on short-term satisfaction. They wouldn't value long-term returns or long-term satisfaction. So they will value short-term satisfaction over long-term returns. So again, they won't be taking rational decision. Why? Because rational would be to evaluate long-term return, but they might value short-term satisfaction over long-term losses. Mental accounting is that people will not see whole of their investment as consolidated one. They will divide them into buckets. So for example, this bucket, my 20% of wealth is for consumption. I will not invest it. My, let's say, 30% of wealth is for risk-free investment. And then my 50% of wealth is for risky investment. So in mentally in their mind, investors may divide their wealth into different buckets. Rational would be that whole of this wealth should be invested into a place that is maximizing the return, but they won't do it. They will still be dividing it into different buckets and then will be allocating different layers. You can call it layers or you can call it buckets into different investment. Then framing bias that we have already discussed, that different responses based on how questions are asked or framed. Questions, framing, and asking methodology can impact the investor's response. People classify their sources of wealth into three basic accounts: current income, that is for current consumption, current owned assets, and present value of future income. This is again mental accounting, that is dividing your wealth into different buckets in your mind. While rationally you should be this is all money and interchangeable. So rationally you should be seeing it as one, but you may not see it as one. A behavioral approach to asset pricing. So this was behavioral approach to consumption and savings. Now moving on, behavioral approach to asset pricing. Investors display biased behaviors that lead to less than optimal decisions, as we discussed already. That investor may not take optimal decision, they may take less than optimal decision, and they may want to satisfy and not necessarily maximize satisfaction. Sharon and Stadman gave a stochastic discount factor based asset pricing model. So this discount factor based asset pricing model says that there should be certain discount for the behavior of the investor. So for example, if the asset price is $100, but you know that investors will perceive this stock as having $90 value, then there's some discount needs to be applied. So maybe its true value is $100, but maybe there is some news in the market due to which investors think that stock has some problem, and due to that investors will only buy and sell it at a price of $90. So there can be certain discounts to the true value based on the investor's behavior. Also, these assumptions or these perceptions can be reflected into analyst forecast. So if there is a stock, let's say A, and maybe there is an analyst X who has an earnings forecast of $2.5 for this stock. There can be an analyst Y who has an earnings forecast of 2.6. There can be an analyst Z who has a forecast of, let's say, $4, and there can be an analyst B who has a forecast of only $0.5. So there can be dispersion in the analyst estimates as well, based on their personal perceptions and based on how they perceive the market or how they analyze the investors' behavior. And there should be certain risk premium charged for this dispersion. So this theory, behavioral finance, says that this dispersion is due to differences in sentiment. This dispersion reflects the sentiment risk. That is, overall, if market sentiment is down, then dispersion will be higher within analyst estimates. Different analysts will be coming up with the different estimates. Why? Because they would think that market will react in abnormal way due to high sentiment risk. If overall markets dynamics are consistent, or if overall market dynamics are stable and there is and sentiment risk is low, that is, changes in sentiments are not expected to happen in near future, then standard deviation of analyst forecast will be lower. So this dispersion of analyst forecasts reflects the sentiment risk, and based on this dispersion, a premium should be charged in asset pricing. If there is a high dispersion, then you should incorporate some premium, some sentiment risk premium in your pricing. If there is lower dispersion, then you can have a lower premium or no premium in your asset pricing. So your discount rate should also incorporate these risk premiums. So this is, your discount rate is risk-free rate plus fundamental premium. So far in traditional economics, it used to be risk-free rate plus fundamental premiums like maturity premium, liquidity premium, default risk premium, and all that. But now in behavioral finance, you should also add a sentiment risk premium. Also, this theory, behavioral finance, says that rational and informed investors are only few in number. So only few people will be taking decisions rationally. Other people will not be taking decisions rationally, and their decisions will be affected by their behavior. Moving on comes behavioral portfolio theory, BPT. Again, same thing, you will see same thing, same concept being repeated again and again in every theory and everywhere. So BPT again bases its explanation on the mental accounting that we discussed here. So it again says that investors will make investments into layers, and risk and return attitudes towards layers will be different. So maybe this layer is allocated to risk-free assets, maybe this layer is allocated to moderately risky assets, and this layer is allocated to high risky assets. So investors' attitude, risk and return attitude towards investment will be dependent on the layer in which layer it belongs to. So instead of, if investor has, let's say, $100,000 to invest, instead of seeing it as one, it will divide it into different layers. So let's say $20,000 here, $50,000 here, and $30,000 here. So he will invest this into risk-free assets, 50,000 into moderately risky assets, and 30,000 into risky assets. So his risk attitude, risk and return attitude will be dependent on the layer to which this amount belongs to. Again, mental accounting bias. There are 5 factors for portfolio construction: allocation to different layers, allocation of funds within a layer to specific assets. So first is allocation to layer, that we discussed 30, 50, 20. Now within this allocation to different assets, so let's say if I am talking about second layer, 50,000, then how much will I invest to FIS, how much will I invest to equity? Then number of assets chosen for a layer, how many assets do I want to invest into? Maybe 10 FIS and 5 equity. Number of assets chosen for a year, concentrated positions in some securities. Maybe within these 5 equities, I think that one of the equities A is high performer and will do great in future. So maybe overall 25% of the total layer, I allocate overall 25% of the total layer to A because I think it will do good. So concentrating positions in the assets. Investors are reluctant to realize losses and may hold higher amounts of cash to meet liquidity needs. That in these layers, maybe investors would want to keep a higher than optimal amount of cash in risk-free or higher than optimal amount in risk-free assets or in cash. So again, 5 factors. Just remember the key concepts of theories so that when you do theoretical questions or MCQs, you should be able to recall it easily. Concept stays the same. This is the same concept that we are discussing again and again and again. So traditional finance relates to utility and base formula, and behavioral finance relates to bounded rationality and prospect theory and mental accounting and biases. Moving on, adaptive market hypothesis. So earlier we discussed efficient market hypothesis. Efficient market hypothesis said that investors will incorporate all the information, market would have incorporated all the information into pricing, and you cannot make abnormal returns based on that abnormal information, and that all the investors will be rational and would have reacted to the information. Now we are discussing adaptive market hypothesis, that is AMH. Adaptive market hypothesis says that efficient market may not prevail. Why? Because it says that there are other factors that will be affecting the asset pricing, and that can be competition, adaptation, and natural selection. So if there is more competition within a sector A, B, C, D, if there is more competition, there will be lesser adaptability of participant. What does adaptability means? Adaptability means changing your behavior with respect to market, that is adapting to the market. So if there is more competition, there will be less adaptability of participants. Participants will not be willing to adapt more, and due to that less adaptability, if market is changing and they are not changing with the market, or they are not changing their strategies with the market, then there is less likelihood of surviving. So if let's say there are 10 funds within the and there is a market, these funds may have their own biases, and if market changes, they will need to change their strategies or their biases with respect to market. That is known as adaptation. If these funds are not able to adapt, then there is less likelihood of them surviving. That is, and this adaptability will depend on the competition. If there is more competition in 100 funds, then there will be lesser adaptability. If there is lower competition, there will be higher adaptability. Successful participant will adapt to changing environment and develop new heuristics. Success is defined as survival rather than having maximized expected utility. Again, AMH says that investor will not maximize expected utility, but will survive. So focus will be on survival. Success will be survival. Success will not be maximizing utility. And survival will depend on adaptability. If funds are being, or investors are being able to adapt to changing environment, they will succeed. Otherwise, they will not survive. AMH is revised version of EMH that considers bounded rationality, satisficing, and evolutionary principle. So in simple words, EMH is a concept of traditional finance. If you add concepts of behavioral finance to traditional finance, you will arrive at AMH. And what are the concepts of behavioral finance, theories of behavioral finance? Bounded rationality, satisficing, and evolutionary principle. This you already know. Evolutionary principle is something that we just discussed, that you need to evolve, you need to adapt to the changing market. 5 implications of AMH are: risk-reward relationship varies over time due to changes in risk preference and competitive environment. If competitive environment is changing, risk-reward relationship will change. Your behavior towards risk and reward will change. Active management can add value by exploiting arbitrage opportunities. Any particular investment strategy will not consistently do good, but have periods of superior and inferior performance. So you need to change your strategy as the market evolves or changes. If you do not do that, you will fail. Ability to adapt and innovate is critical for survival. Again, this theory only focuses on survival. It does not say that you will maximize utility. You won't maximize utility, but you will survive. And survival is the success. Why? Because the assumption is that utility cannot be, or you will not be able to maximize utility. Survival is the essential objective. Survivors will be those who successfully learn and adapt to the changes. This is adaptive market hypothesis. So if you combine behavioral finance aspects or theories to EMH, you will arrive at AMH. So remember these differences. This is very, very important. Again, question. So just a suggestion on how I used to do questions in level 2 and level 3 is, and especially in level 3, because there will be lots of theory. So when you are doing this is MCQ question, but when you are doing theoretical questions, there are two strategies. So you will be given a long case, 2 pages or 3 pages or 1 page, maybe 1.5 page. So first, one strategy is that you read through the case line by line. So you read out all the case and then you go on to question, and now you take first question and then you again go to case and find out the answer, and second question and find out the answer, and that's how you do it. So that strategy is that you read out case in detail so that you know what is happening in the case and what all it is all about. This is a good strategy or a better strategy, but this is not advised strategy. So when you are doing your exam, you are doing your questions, this is not what I will advise. Obviously it varies from person to person, so if you think this is best, do it, but this is not advisable. So how I will advise it, that first read question. So read first question and then start reading out the case, and you will find answers somewhere here. Then read second question, continue in your case, and you will link these two paragraphs and you will find answer by the end of this paragraph. And then third question and then fourth question. First read, advisable is that you first read question and then go to reading the case, so that you save your time. So idea is to save time. So if I read the question, which of the following statements is most consistent with expected utility theory? So there are statements and they are asking you which of the following statements is most accurate, most consistent with expected utility theory. Statement 1, 2, 3. So before we go on to reading these statements, first thing to know here is that they are talking about utility theory. That means they are talking about traditional finance and they are talking about rational economic man. So these keywords should be anchored into your mind immediately, so that when you read out the statement, you know what you need to find out. So first 3 statements you have to read. First is from a colleague: when new information on a company becomes available, I adjust my expectations for that company's stock based on past experiences with similar information. So key point to note is that if a new information is coming in, then you need to evaluate that information as per present circumstances and not as per how it happened in past. So maybe in past, when company used to beat earning estimates, the stock used to go up 10%. But maybe now circumstances have changed. Maybe now future prospects are weak, and even if company beats estimates, maybe even then its stock does not go up. Or maybe investors are expecting that at least company should beat estimate by 20% or 5%, and then I will buy it, otherwise I will not buy it. So even if it beats the estimate, but it beats by 2%, the stock price can fall. So new information should not be, rationally it should not be evaluated based on past experiences with similar information. From a client, so this does not look to be a rational thing to do. When considering investments, I have always liked using long option positions. I like their risk-return trade-offs. My personal estimates of the probability of gains seem to be higher than that implied by the market prices. That means his estimates are different from what is prevailing in the market. Again, this is against rational economic man theory. Why? Because it says that everyone will be of same characteristics and everyone will have same estimate of the probabilities. Estimates cannot be different. So this seems to be again against that. I am not sure how to explain that, but to me, not sure how to explain that. He does not have any explanation for it. So that means there are certain personal biases that is causing this probability to be higher. But to me, long options provide tremendous upside. There is a bias, obvious bias here. Why? Because he is differentiating between long term and short term, or sorry, long and short calls. That is buying and selling or different positions. So this does not seem to be the answer. From a client, I have always followed a budget and have been a disciplined saver for decades. Keyword is discipline. Even in hard times, I had to reduce my usual discretionary spending. I always managed to save. So that means he hasn't divided his wealth into spending and saving. If he thinks that saving more is rational, he will cut down his spending and save more. So that means he is managing his portfolio rationally, and so he is working on maximizing the utility, and so C is your answer. So as long as you know the keywords, you are able to find keywords, you should be able to do it. Which of the following statement most likely indicates that a belief that technical anomalies exist in the capital markets? 2, 4 and 6. When considering investments, I could not find any technical anomaly here. Technical anomaly is based on past price movements or stock price movements, or taking decisions based on the trends or stock price movements. Moving on to 4, while I try to make decisions analytically, I do believe the markets can be driven by emotions of others. This is an anomaly. So I have frequently used buy sell signal. This is clearly technical anomaly. Technical anomaly is using buy sell signals. That is if moving average is going up, then you buy it. If it is going down, then you sell it. So clearly this is your answer. Statement 4 is most consistent with the adaptive market hypothesis. So he is not adapting to market. He is instead using technical anomaly. So doesn't seem to be the answer. Behavioral approach, yes. Technical anomaly. Subjective expected utility, no, not utility theory. So B is your answer. So this is about it for this